I'm Carla, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. My younger sister Sarah burst into the world like a supernova, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. From day one, she had our parents wrapped around her little finger. Me? I was the quiet one, more interested in my chemistry set than in making friends. I still remember my 10th birthday. I'd been hoping for a new microscope, dropping hints for weeks. Instead, I got a frilly dress that made me look like a cupcake. But Mom, I hate dresses, I protested. Nonsense, you'll look just like Sarah, she beamed, completely missing the point. As we grew older, the divide only widened. Sarah breezed through school on charm and good looks, while I buried myself in books and science experiments. Did you hear? Sarah's been nominated for prom queen. Mom gushed over dinner one night. That's great, I mumbled, trying to muster some enthusiasm. I won first place in the science fair today. Oh, that's nice, dear, Dad said absently, already turning back to Sarah. So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet? And so it went, year after year. My achievements, no matter how significant, were always overshadowed by Sarah's latest triumph, no matter how trivial. The state science fair in my senior year was my moment to shine. I'd spent months perfecting my project on sustainable biofuels. When they announced the winners, I could hardly believe my ears. First place goes to Carla Johnson. I was ecstatic. Finally, something even my parents couldn't ignore. Or so I thought. That's great, honey, Mom said distractedly when I told her the news. But we can't make it to the awards ceremony. Sarah has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her. I watched them fuss over Sarah's costume and makeup, my trophy gathering dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I was getting used to. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could barely contain my excitement. Full scholarship to a prestigious university? It was more than I'd dared to hope for. Mom, Dad, I got in. I burst into the living room, waving the letter. Full ride and everything. Mom glanced up from her magazine. That's nice, dear. Sarah, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress? Just like that, my big moment was brushed aside. Again. But, it's a full scholarship, I tried again, my voice smaller this time. Dad patted my shoulder absently. Good job, kiddo. Sarah, Princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything, can we? I watched them pile into the car, my acceptance letter crumpled in my fist. It was a familiar feeling, but it still stung. Despite the lack of fanfare from my family, I packed my bags and headed off to college with high hopes. For the first time, I was free from Sarah's shadow, free to be just Carla. College was a revelation. Suddenly, my passion for science wasn't weird or nerdy, it was respected, even admired. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Sarah followed the path our parents had always dreamed of. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. College is so hard, she whined during one of our rare phone calls. I don't know how you do it, Carla. I bit back the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, I just mumbled some vague encouragement and changed the subject. It was during my sophomore year that Sarah dropped her bombshell. I'm engaged, she squealed over the phone. Mike proposed last night. Isn't it romantic? Mike. Her high school sweetheart. The guy who'd once asked me if science was like, really hard and stuff. That's great, Sarah, I managed, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Have you set a date? We're thinking right after graduation, she gushed. Oh, Carla, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you? The wedding was exactly as you'd expect. Sarah was radiant, Mike looked uncomfortable in his tux, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, pasting on a smile for the photos. Isn't this perfect? Mom whispered to me during the reception. This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter. I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day, after all. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother." Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful?" I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren?" Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. "You know, Carla," Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee, "you're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm focused on my career right now, Dad." Mom clucked her tongue. "Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters." I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, I was a senior researcher. My parents' response to this news? A distracted "that's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. It was around this time that I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house?" Mom repeated. "All by yourself?" "Yes, all by myself," I said, my excitement deflating a little. "It's a great investment, and—" "But it's such a big house for one person," Mom interrupted. "What will you do with all that space?" I sighed. "I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine." "Well," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, "I suppose if that's what you want." "Oh, did I tell you? Emma lost her first tooth yesterday." And just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, I thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie, we'd been thinking. That big house of yours, it's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we'd been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. Okay, and? And we think, my mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out. For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell, "Gotcha," and reveal it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. You can't be serious, I finally managed. Now, Carla, my mother said, her tone patronizing. Don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do. Selfish? I repeated, my voice rising. How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself? It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need, my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. And what do you have to say about this? She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family, asking me to give up my home, acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. No, I said firmly, standing up. Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house. As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard my father call out. Think about it, Carla. Family should come first. The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, unable to believe my family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, I answered. Hello, is this Carla? A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. Yes, who's this? This is your Aunt Mildred. I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you. I felt my blood pressure rising. Aunt Mildred, that's not... In my day, she continued, not letting me get a word in. Family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers. I'm not hoarding anything, I snapped. It's my house. I bought it with my own money. Well, she huffed, if you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway. I was so shocked, I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me? You heard me, she said primly. You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. Carla dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say, it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house. It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to dread checking my phone, wincing every time it buzzed. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. It was during one of these late nights at work that I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it. A noise at my front door. Like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping towards the door. Through the window, I could see figures on my porch. Familiar figures. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. What the hell are you doing? There, caught red-handed, were my parents and Sarah. They looked like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was the first to recover. Carla, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. My father at least had the decency to look embarrassed. We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay? I was practically shouting now. What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone? Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home. I noticed for the first time that there was a car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. You were going to move in, I said, my voice flat. You were actually going to move into my house without my permission. Now, Carla, my mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative. You thought wrong, I cut her off. This is my house, mine. I bought it with my own money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it. Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, mouthing, "Police?" I nodded, grateful for their concern. Turning back to my family, I said, "I've called the police. You need to leave. Now." "You wouldn't," my father scoffed. "Your own family?" As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled. The police car pulled up, and 2 officers got out. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, eyeing the scene warily. I took a deep breath. "Yes, officer. These people were attempting to break into my home." "Carla," my mother gasped. "How could you?" The officers looked at my family. "Is this true?" My father started to stammer out an explanation, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." As the officers escorted my family off my property, I stood in the doorway, shaking. I couldn't believe it had come to this. "You'll regret this, Carla," Sarah called over her shoulder as they were leaving. "You'll end up old and alone." I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. My phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, dysfunctional as it had been. It was in this tumultuous state that I received an unexpected message. It was from my Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd had a falling out with my mom over some old family drama. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Café Bleu at 1400 hours." Intrigued and desperate for any ally, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Maggie in a cozy corner of Café Bleu. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Carla," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side. But there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." My curiosity piqued, I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. "Your parents and Sarah, they're in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why? How?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Maggie continued. "Mike has a gambling problem. A bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years." The pieces started to fall into place. The desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure. "But what about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They'd been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house. I sat back, stunned. How do you know all this? I work at the bank where they all have accounts, Aunt Maggie explained. I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family. My mind was reeling. All this time, while I'd been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole. And they'd tried to drag me down with them. Carla, Aunt Maggie said gently, I know this is a lot to take in. But I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea. Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diana who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. He's been funneling money to her for months, Diana explained, showing U.S. bank statements and hotel receipts. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. But where did he get the money? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Diana's face grew grim. From his gambling wins, and from your parents. Aunt Maggie and I exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me, the very house they had tried to take from me would be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought I was going to cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know, I began. I laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from their faces. Sarah jumped up, tears streaming down her face. It's not true, she screamed, before collapsing into sobs. Mike, tell them it's not true. But Mike was already halfway to the door. Uncle Bob, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. You son of, he growled. That's my daughter you've been fooling around with. My parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their exposed financial ruin seemingly more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal my house. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began to stammer out apologies. We had no idea, Aunt Mildred muttered. Carla, we're so sorry. As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Sarah, unable to forgive Mike's infidelity, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house. They were forced to downsize to a small, rented apartment, all 5 of them crammed into a space smaller than my living room. As for me, I watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. You're doing the right thing, Carla, Aunt Maggie assured me one afternoon over coffee. It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being. Aunt Maggie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new routine. Without the constant drama and demands of my family, I had time to focus on myself. But with that came a startling realization: I was lonely. You know, Aunt Maggie said one day, there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new? With her encouragement, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. That's where I met Alex. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope. When he turned and flashed me a warm smile, I felt my heart skip a beat. "First time?" he asked, noticing my nervous fidgeting with the equipment. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As we talked, I learned he was a wildlife photographer, with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Alex was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. We began dating, our shared love for nature and understanding of complex family dynamics bringing us closer. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to me. Through it all, Aunt Maggie remained my steadfast support. She became the mother figure I had always yearned for, but never had. "Carla," she said to me one day, her eyes misty. "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, I marveled at how much my life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. With Aunt Maggie's love, Alex's support, and my newfound strength, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held.